Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Were you up late?
Later than normal, but not too late. I didn't have to write last night. I got up and wrote this morning, so it's not as bad. How about you?
I don't know. I managed to. I wrote overnight, but I got done at 1:30 in the morning, which is not bad for me on a debate night. I've actually gone past 3 before, so fortunately, I managed to figure out what I wanted to say. It didn't involve like a whole lot of research and verbatim quotes and stuff.
Someday I'm going to move out to the West Coast and I'll finish these things up at 9 o'clock at night and then go out to dinner. But anyway, vice presidential debates not known to be that important. I don't know if this one will be important, but for starters, let's treat it like it was. Who do you think won?
Honestly, I mean, it depends on how I define it. Vance won on points. If I was tallying as I went, like who got the last word, who had their made their argument and it wasn't checked properly. I would say Vance won that pretty handily. But I do think that that's obviously not a very novel observation. The January 6th question was a disaster for Vance, and I think that clip's going to get replayed a lot. Walz really took a pass on a lot of opportunities, which may have been a choice. But again, if I'm scoring on points, he let Vance get away with all sorts of things. But kind of like in the fourth quarter, on the big one, he did not let Vance get away with not answering the question. Did Donald Trump lose the election? So I thought it was pretty big, and there may have been a value in Walz going light because he didn't sacrifice his likable persona. If he was being a bulldog the whole time, that might have undercut all the likability, the reservoir of likability he's collected over the past month. And we see in the instant polls, Walz's favorable shot up amongst debate watchers, as did Vance's. So I'm not saying Vance, overall did a bad job for himself. But I do think
according to the CNN instant poll, Walz did. They both improved, but Walz improved dramatically more. 59% of viewers viewed Walz favorably.
Yeah, so Walz being maybe a little more inarticulate doesn't necessarily mean that the average voter thinks ill of him, because he might just seem like just the way like I might think Al Gore ran circles around George Bush, but George Bush seemed like a regular guy.
Yes.
So, and to the extent that
I mean, honestly, that sounds like sophistry, or it sounds like you're coping. But the polls would lead one to maybe the polls mean that that's not an absurd theory. It may be true.
I mean, as our resident regular guy, real American Matt Lewis, when you were watching, did you have that reaction, or did you think Walz was face planting?
Well, I'm not a regular guy, so I mean, I do live in West Virginia. My dad was a prison guard. But I've also worked in this business for 15 years, and that means I'm weird. And so here's what I think. I think that J.D. Vance, who is someone who is like me and you, he's a podcaster. He's an author, just like we are. And so I think maybe even though you and I may not like him personally, may not agree with him on all the political issues, we may stylistically be predisposed to think he did a good job. And that may be the case with a lot of observers and writers. Is that people like us were watching, and Vance seemed to be more articulate. But maybe that comes across as slick to average Americans. And that may be what I think you're getting at here. And it sounds like rationalization, but, again, maybe it's true.
Now, this is obviously not, a cross-section of America or anything. I just thought it was notable in my social media interaction. So I wrote, early on in the debate on X, Vance has the mansplainer's ability to sound like a total know-it-all when saying complete nonsense. And look, the whole podcasting world is very male dominated. People want to talk into a microphone, not hear anybody else. And obviously this is getting reaction from people who are on the left. I was struck by the number of women who replied in my feed far more than usual. I don't usually get necessarily a disproportionate amount of women that respond, and I got a lot of uh, positive, yes, bingo, kind of reaction from the
Yeah.
women in my feed. So again, that's not necessarily the middle of America. Um, and I think, polls overall would say, Vance helped himself. His favorables went up. He said it
Yeah.
better than childless cat lady guy. He sounded like he was almost pro-choice at some points.
Well, I definitely think this helps Vance if his goal is to become the heir apparent of MAGA at some point. This is a step in the right direction. And look, I think he did a few things incredibly well. One of them was he basically tried to be, he really tried to perform this role of explaining Trumpism or Trump's positions in a way that is commonsensical, ironic. Um, it's a hard task, but I think he did a really good job of like coming across as more reasonable while explaining positions that they've staked out. He also really put off this amazing act where he cast Kamala Harris as the incumbent president. He referred to the Harris administration and the Harris Biden administration, and Walz let him get away with that. And I think that was a major coup that Vance was able to do it. He does I think he was very eloquent. He's like ironically better at debating on a national stage than he is at ordering donuts, which is a weird a weird like thing to say about somebody. But again, I think it does come back to how does it play in Peoria?
Yeah, and I was pretty frustrated that Walz wasn't responding to that kind of thing, because I thought, it's just an obvious point. We don't live in a dictatorship. One person can't wave a wand and do all these things, and not to mention she's not even the president.
Yeah.
She would have presidential powers, but it may be. And I think it also sort of frustrates me is that it's never the rejoinder is never your guy Donald Trump was president for 4 freaking years. He's saying he's going to do all these sorts of things that he didn't do when he was literally the president. But it may be that the Waltz debate team game that kind of thing out and decide, you know what, if you go down that rabbit hole, you're going to find yourself having to acknowledge, oh, she's not that powerful. She's kind of a weak figure. Oh, she's really just under Joe Biden's thumb. And now you're defending a bunch of Joe Biden things. Maybe just take a pass on it. Maybe just like take that hit and go talk about what you want to talk about and not worry about it. So it might not be like, Waltz being all thumbs. It may have been a choice. Well, I'll leave another point I want to make, but it's a separate topic, so I'll leave it there.
Well, I would also say just superficially, again, this goes to my larger theme about how those of us who are in the industry maybe perceive Vance as performing very well, and maybe regular Americans perceive Walz as more likable. Walz, to me, his sort of resting face, he looked sort of bewildered a lot of the night. And I would also say the split camera or whatever that's called. He was always like furiously scribbling notes, which I thought wasn't necessarily the best look. So aesthetically, I thought Vance had just looked better, performed better. It is a real skill set to be able to get up there and talk and make these points for an hour and a half. And you saw Walz did start to fall apart, and I don't blame him at all, being under that stress. But at that one point, he had this very bad gaffe where he said that he's friends with a lot of school shooters, which of course we know he doesn't mean that. What he meant to say is he's become friends with families of victims of school shooters. But it's just an example, I think, of how under that sort of the bright lights and the stress, I think he started to maybe fall apart a little bit, whereas I think Vance held up better. But I do think the nervousness, this will contradict myself, I think that Walz got less nervous as the night went on. And as you mentioned, in the fourth quarter, he had that really strong moment where he held J.D. Vance's feet to the fire, and Vance refused to say who won the 2020 election. But I don't know if the fourth quarter analogy really holds up there, Bill. I mean, in a football game, what matters in the fourth quarter is arguably more important than what happens in the first quarter. I think in a debate, a lot more people are probably paying attention early on, and so I wonder if maybe Walz's best moment came way too late in the
Oh,
night.
I disagree with that. I don't think it, like, watching in real time is much less important than what gets replayed afterwards. And I suspect that clip's gonna get replayed afterwards a lot.
Mm.
Uh, so if you were if it was like a literal competition, and what's the judge's score going to be at the end of the debate, then yeah, maybe I would agree with you. I don't think this is how this is going to be judged at the end of the day, if it's even judged at all, because people are going to forget about this, in 24, 48 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the huge caveat, is that none of this probably matters that much. But we have to, this is what we get paid to do, and today it matters a lot, and it will matter a lot.
And the thing that we talk
JD
about
Vance.
afterwards, I think a lot of this post-debate talk is going to be about that moment.
Well, here's my concern, though, if you're on Team Harris, Walz. As you know, Bill, those of us who write about debates, luckily I didn't write about it last night, I wrote this morning. So for me, I factored that in. But typically what happens is you will decide in the first half hour of a debate who won and who lost. And you'll start kind of writing the piece. And look, if something dramatic happens, you'll ball it up and throw it in the waste bin. But generally speaking, the narrative develops early on. And I think that just like Kamala, got off to a pretty good start against Trump in that debate, and just like Biden fell apart pretty early against Trump, I think the narrative is established early on in the first half hour, at least.
Well, I don't think it's totally baked in. I mean, some folks might run with that, but I think the contest of winning the narrative does go on afterwards. And I'll be interested. I'll be curious to see how the Harris campaign plays this going in the next 48 hours. I don't know if you saw what I wrote this morning, but my bigger takeaway beyond the January 6th moment is this was just a glimpse of what life could be like in a world without Donald Trump.
Yes.
The fact that Walz was being so generous to Vance, and vice versa, they both had incentive to be nice to the other. Vance had the worst unfavorables of the four of them on the ticket. He didn't want to come like an even bigger douche, so he went out of his way to be complimentary to the Walz. He didn't go for the jugular. There are things that Vance was saying on the trail about Walz being a liar, having stolen valor. He didn't go there at all in the debate. He didn't attack him for being effeminate. Yeah. He didn't attack his son for being effeminate. None of that. And Walz beforehand was trashing, was going after Vance's book for forgetting where he came from, for trashing his hometown, for trashing the people that he grew up with. He didn't go there at all. And he might have, so Vance might have thought, I got to be a more likable person. I can't be a bad guy. And Walz might have said, I'm already a likable person. I don't want to blow it. And so they ended up having a pretty civil debate, lies aside. I mean, I don't want to give Vance a pass for it, because I think he lied just as much as Donald Trump did, just did it with a nicer face. Nevertheless, we saw what life could be like in a world without Donald Trump, and it's pretty freaking refreshing.
I mean, it was, it was bad, but within the spectrum of the normal political world, right? I mean, it was this was a debate that could have happened pre-Trump, possibly, and I would have been probably rooting for JD Vance back then. I mean, look, you had two candidates who were both sane. You had two candidates who were attempting to put their positions in the most compassionate light possible, and the most trying to present their positions as being commonsensical and good for all Americans, not just their team. Nobody was senile. Nobody was crazy. And I do think in that regard, it was refreshing. It wasn't Lincoln Douglas. It wasn't even Lieberman Cheney, but maybe it was Romney Obama, almost something like that.
Well, I don't look back at Romney Obama with fond memories, but if I'm the Harris campaign, if I'm Tim Walz, I might consider really bluntly praising Vance and using him as a cudgel against Trump and driving a wedge between the two of them, because we know that Donald Trump does not like being shown up. We know how easy it is to debate Donald Trump. So to just say what I said outright, wasn't this great? JD Vance is so much better than Donald Trump at having a civil, reasonable debate. And wouldn't it be great not to have Donald Trump's toxicity, be coursing through our veins all the time that we've had to suffer for the last 10 years? How would Trump react to that in the rally the subsequent day?
Yeah, he doesn't react well to that. I don't know if that's a smart move for Democrats, but if your goal is to troll Donald Trump and to engage in psychological warfare, there are definitely worse ideas. I think, Bill, and we'll keep this one really short for a variety of reasons. But I think at the end of the day, you and I both agree that this doesn't matter much in terms of the 2024. It might mean a lot for JD Vance's future or Tim Walz, but I don't think this matters much in terms of 2024. I think they both survived and did what they needed to do. I'm going to be very interested to see if these kind of snap polls hold up. Like if a few days from now, Tim Walz is more likable than JD Vance and all that, I'm going to find that fascinating. And I think that might actually teach us something about how you should debate if you're going into something like this. And maybe it would speak to that hunger for a return to normalcy, Bill. Maybe that they're rewarding these candidates for not being Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm not expecting big shifts in the polling after this. I don't think it's going to be anybody's minds directly. I'm going to vote for Harris because Tim Walz did a good job, or I'm going to vote for Trump because JD Vance did a good job. But we are seeing the two competing frames of the race, where Harris and Walz are trying to prosecute normal versus weird, and Vance trying to prosecute Harris's a radical liberal and also very vacuous, and probably both campaigns got their frames out over the course of the night, directly or indirectly, and that is where I still lean towards the Harris Walz campaign overall, is that I think they're still playing error-free ball. We haven't had a news cycle that's been dominated by a gaffe, a mistake, a scandal. Even we have this little thing that happened yesterday. Tim Walz said he was in China in June when he was really in there in August. That's not consuming the campaign today. That's not even like Joe Biden saying "you ain't black," which really dominated a couple of news cycles. And it wasn't, and didn't even destroy him at the end of the day.
They're sort of like the Baltimore Orioles. They're not getting a ton of hits, but they held the other team to one run. So it could be worse. I will say this though, Bill. If the whole goal of Harris and Walz is to paint Trump and Vance as weird, I think Vance undermined that during this debate. I think Vance actually tamped down on that because he didn't come across as weird.
Yes, but January 6th.
Okay. That's a big if, or a big, what about? I agree with you. I will be interested also to see if you're right that becomes the soundbite that's played over and over, and that people who didn't watch the debate hear about.
Right. But the bigger question in my mind is, we've essentially, to take the polls at face value, it's a toss-up race, could go either way. And my inclination is to give the edge to the campaign that is not making mistakes and appears to be running the better ground game. If I'm going to win a game by inches, that would seem to be the candidate you want to put your money on. And I feel like even if Walz didn't have like the best debate, he didn't have a disaster of a debate that created a gaffe, that created a mistake that consumes the next news cycle. And same thing with the Harris interviews. Those haven't really created. I know that it gets clipped out by the right, and they say, "Oh, this is cringy. Oh, she looks stupid." It hasn't really dominated a news cycle the way some of Biden's gaffes have done. or that Trump does on a regular basis. So now we have the 60 Minutes thing coming up where Kamala's saying yes and Trump is saying no. This is the biggest. Who's doing interviews? Maybe Trump does more interviews than Kamala. 60 Minutes is the biggest interview. It literally is the news program with the biggest audience. And Trump is being a crybaby about, they said they might run a fact check afterwards, so now I'm not going to do it. And that's a weird thing about the debate, too. Vance might have been correct to say, hey, CBS, you said you weren't going to fact check, and now you're fact checking me. You not just said on national television that you don't like being fact checked. Like, a fact check is not an insult to most people. It may be an insult in MAGA land. But if you're an average watcher who didn't know about this backstory, I actually talked to someone who's pretty liberal in my friend circle, was wondering about that, and I had explained to her, CBS said they weren't going to fact check it. She go, I didn't know that. So that's another thing that might become a thing afterwards. I probably don't think it's going to be as big a thing as the January 6th thing, but I think the Trump campaigns, we have sort of two examples of them complaining about fact checking. I don't think that's a great look to an undecided voter.
All right, my friend, you make a compelling case. Let's keep it at that. We'll keep it tight. We'll get this up when people are still, looking for post-debate commentary. Any final thoughts or anything you want to plug?
Nothing super important to plug. I did write a thing pre-debate, 5 barbs that Walz could throw at J.D. Vance's face, of which to use none. But you might be interested in seeing those Vance quotes, because some of them aren't well known. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Bill Scher's streak of driving his ideas into the news cycle comes to a screeching halt.
I will do a gender gap tracker update tomorrow, but I'm a little nervous about it because as of this moment, I've not seen a national poll in the past week with a gender gap, with the gender crosstab. It's been a really light week in polling, some swing state polls. Maybe someone's going to come out today and I can actually give you some fresh numbers. But that's sort of an odd aspect of this week.
All right. I've got a piece hopefully coming out later today. That is Wednesday at The Hill. My take on the debate. Check that out. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show. Bill Scher. Hopefully we'll see you next week back here in the DMZ.
Take care.